4 weeks. That is how long I was at sea. I drove up on a Tuesday evening, but my key would not turn. My name was gone from the mailbox. Caleb's was taped over it. Inside, my brother walked out holding my grandfather's cracked mug. Mom said I could have the house. He shrugged. You are never here. I withheld my outrage. Instead, I analyzed the architecture of his lie. Tell me where you are listening from, and if you have ever been replaced in your own life. I saw the fracture immediately. I inspect the structural integrity of deep-sea oil rigs for a living. Most people do not understand what that means until I explain the physics of the ocean. 40 feet underwater, the pressure is immense. It is a silent, crushing weight that looks for any microscopic weakness in the steel. My entire career is dedicated to finding the tiny fracture before it becomes a catastrophic failure. I look for the thing that is about to break before anyone else can even see the stress lines. That is why I travel. That is why I spend 4 weeks at a time completely disconnected from the world, floating on a suspended platform in the middle of nowhere. I endure the cold, the isolation, and the grueling shifts to pay for the ground beneath my feet. At 32 years old, I own a 19th century lighthouse keeper's cottage on the New England coast. It is a $1.2 million property that I bought as a rotting shell and restored with my own hands. I sanded the original pine floors. I replaced the rusted iron fixtures. I built a life out of the wreckage. It is the only thing in this world that truly belongs to me. And yet, standing in my own foyer that Tuesday evening, I was treated like a trespasser. Caleb is 29. He calls himself a startup entrepreneur, which is a polite way of saying he burns through investors' cash while wearing expensive sneakers. He stood in my kitchen, 3 days of stubble on his face, wearing a gym shirt he probably bought on credit. He did not look guilty. He looked slightly inconvenienced by my arrival. You could have called, Caleb said, setting my grandfather's mug on the granite counter. I would have told you to stay at a hotel. Stay at a hotel, instead of staying in the house that I paid for. I felt the exact same chilling calm that washes over me when I place my hand against a submerged steel beam and feel it buckling under a load it was never designed to carry. My brother was wearing my home like a coat he had found on a park bench. I did not ask him why he was there. I did not demand answers from a man who clearly believed he had already won. Anger is a useless emotion when you are dealing with a structural collapse. You do not yell at a falling building. You step back, you assess the damage, and you calculate exactly how to bring it down safely. I looked at Caleb. I looked at the cheap plastic storage bins stacked against my beautifully restored wainscoting. Enjoy the evening, I told him quietly. Later that night, the real work started. I began my own inspection. Before I walked out of the house that night, I took a slow, deliberate walk down the hallway. The walls felt unfamiliar. The quiet sanctuary I had built was contaminated. My antique cedar chests were gone, replaced by a massive, generic leather sofa that Caleb had likely financed. The framed photographs of my 4-year renovation process, the before, during, and after shots had been taken down. They were shoved face first into a cardboard box in the corner. They had not just moved him in. They had actively started erasing the fact that I had ever existed in this space. Then, I heard a soft humming sound coming from the back of the house. Approaching my old bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. The harsh smell of fresh paint drifted into the hallway. When I pushed the door open, the air caught in my throat. Claire was standing on a stepladder. She is 27 years old, Caleb's fiancée, and a kindergarten teacher with the kindest eyes I have ever seen. She was wearing overalls, one hand resting protectively over the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. She was carefully rolling a soft, buttery yellow paint onto my bedroom walls. The paint can on the floor was labeled Morning Light. She turned around and gasped, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "Nora, you are back." Before I could process the moment, Claire carefully climbed down the ladder and wrapped her arms around me. She smelled like vanilla and primer. She pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you so much for this. Caleb told me what you did. I know you are moving to a new state for your big promotion, but giving us this house, it is the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me. We finally have a real home for the baby." The silence in the room stretched tight. Looking over Claire's shoulder, I saw Caleb standing in the doorway. His face went entirely pale. His eyes darted to mine, carrying a silent, desperate warning. "Do not ruin this." In a fraction of a second, I understood the entire architecture of his lie. He had not just stolen my house. He had wrapped the theft in the innocent hopes of a pregnant woman. He used Claire and their unborn child as a human shield, knowing that if I exploded, if I called the police right then and there, I would be the monster destroying a mother's dream. I looked at Claire's smiling face. She had absolutely no idea that the walls she was painting were stolen property. I smiled back at her, a tight, controlled expression. "It is a beautiful color, Claire." I did not expose him. Not yet. I would not let Caleb dictate the terms of his own destruction by forcing a chaotic fight in front of an innocent woman. I turned around, walked past my trembling brother, and picked up my duffel bag. I left the house quietly. I checked into a sterile, quiet hotel room near the highway. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday. The sodium lights from the parking lot bled through the thin curtains, casting long, sharp shadows across the blanket. I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open. I did not call Bertram. I did not text Silas. I knew exactly what my parents would say, and I had no interest in hearing their rehearsed justifications. Instead, I did the most boring, methodical thing a person can do when their world has just been hijacked. I logged into the county recorder's online portal. When your entire profession revolves around catching invisible failures early, you learn never to wait for the disaster to announce itself. You check the data. You look at the blueprints. I typed in my property address. The system loaded for a few agonizing seconds. Then, a new document appeared on the screen. It was a quitclaim deed. It had been officially recorded exactly 8 days ago, while I was completely unreachable, submerged deep beneath the ocean surface. I clicked on the PDF and read the cold, hard text. The document transferred full ownership of the property from Nora to Caleb for the sum of $10 and natural love and affection. I scrolled down to the signature line. There it was. My name, signed in black ink. Sitting alone in that quiet hotel room, I stared at my own forged signature. It was an incredibly decent attempt. Someone had clearly practiced it for hours. The slant was right. The pressure seemed natural, but the loop on the N was entirely wrong. I never loop my capital letters. I write with the blocky, precise strokes of an engineer. Bertram, however, loops all of her letters like she is writing in a cursive workbook. But the signature was not the detail that made the air in the room turn to ice. It was the bright red stamp sitting right next to it. Estelle, Notary Public. There was a commission number, an expiration date, and a small, distinct logo of a hummingbird. A forged signature on a family document is an ugly betrayal, but a forged deed, filed into public record with a notary's official seal, crosses a massive legal boundary. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not a domestic dispute over who gets to live in the coastal cottage. That is a federal felony. Whoever stamped this document had either knowingly participated in a massive real estate fraud, or someone had stolen her seal and used it to counterfeit a legal instrument. Either way, Bertram had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought she was stealing a house from her daughter. She did not realize she was committing a crime against the state. I took a screenshot of the deed, capturing the hummingbird logo and the commission number perfectly. I closed the laptop, letting the screen go dark. The real war had begun. To understand how a mother could steal a $1.2 million house from her own daughter without a single ounce of guilt, you have to understand the toxic trap of normalization. Bertram is 60 years old. She is a woman who moves through life with the absolute conviction that the universe owes her comfort. And by extension, it owes Caleb comfort too. In our family, there were two distinct categories: the one who provided and the one who received. I was 10 years old when I first learned my place in the structure. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house. One afternoon, I came home from school to find my bed, my books, and my clothes moved out of my bedroom and shoved into the drafty, narrow hallway near the stairs. Caleb, who was 7 at the time, had spread all of his toys across my old room. When I asked why, Bertram did not apologize. She did not even look up from her magazine. Your brother needs space for his creativity. Nora, you are strong. You do not need a lot of fuss to be okay. You can handle the hallway. You are strong. You do not need. That was the curse I carried my entire life. In a dysfunctional family system, a capable child is never viewed as a person deserving of love or protection. They are viewed as a utility, a machine that runs silently in the background, generating resources. Caleb was the golden child, fragile and endlessly deserving. I was the scapegoat, the shock absorber for all of his failures. When Caleb crashed a leased car at 21, Bertram drained her savings to cover the damages, calling it a learning experience. When I paid my way through an intense engineering program by working double shifts at a diner, Bertram told the neighbors that I was too independent for my own good, saying it with the exact tone you would use to describe a stray dog. She normalized the extraction of my resources. Over 22 years, she trained herself to believe that taking from me was not theft. It was simply a natural wealth redistribution to balance the scales of the family. Because I was capable of surviving the cold, she felt entirely justified in taking my fire and giving it to Caleb. That is why she felt no remorse forging my signature. In her mind, she was a righteous mother correcting an unfair universe. She honestly believed that since I had an important career and a good income, I did not need a massive coastal house. Caleb had a baby coming. He had needs. Therefore, my property rightfully belonged to him. She viewed me as an endless, unfeeling foundation, built solely to support the weight of my brother's mistakes. But Bertram fundamentally misunderstood how foundations work. You cannot endlessly drill into a support beam and expect the structure to hold. She had miscalculated the load. There is a specific reason why I bought that rotting 19th century cottage 4 years ago. It was not just for the ocean view or the historical architecture. The property originally belonged to my grandfather, a man who spent his entire life working as a coastal lighthouse keeper. He was a quiet, methodical man who understood the rhythm of the tides and the absolute necessity of a solid foundation. More importantly, he was the only person in my family who ever looked at me and saw a human being instead of a convenient resource. When I was a teenager, constantly pushed aside to make room for Caleb's endless needs, my grandfather would let me sit in his workshop. He would hand me a piece of sanded driftwood and tell me that I had good bones, just like the old houses he admired. He told me that a strong structure could weather any storm, as long as the core remained uncompromised. When he passed away, he left a modest inheritance. Bertram immediately assumed the money would be pooled into a family fund to help Caleb start another one of his doomed business ventures. I did not allow that to happen. For the first time in my life, I took what was mine. I used every single penny of that inheritance to buy his old, abandoned cottage from the estate. But I did not just buy it, I secured it. Because of my engineering background, I do not trust anything that relies on a single point of failure. I knew my mother's relentless sense of entitlement. I knew that as long as I owned a valuable asset, she would eventually try to find a way to extract its value for Caleb. So, when I finalized the purchase, I did not just put my name on a standard deed. I worked with a wealth management firm to place the property into a highly specialized irrevocable trust. The trust was designed with a heavy, impenetrable iron vault of a clause. It explicitly stated that no transfer of ownership, no sale, and no equity loan could ever be authorized without my physical presence at a designated bank branch. It required a biometric scan. It required my actual fingerprint to unlock the legal authority of the document. Bertram did not know this. Caleb did not know this. They assumed property law was as simple as printing a form off the internet, forging a signature, and paying a corrupt or careless notary to stamp it. They thought the county recorder's office was the final authority. They had no idea that beneath the surface of the public records, there was a titanium legal structure protecting my home. The fake quitclaim deed they filed was nothing but a piece of decorative paper. From the exact second my mother pressed a counterfeit notary seal onto that document, it was completely and totally void. The house had never left my possession. Legally. Caleb was nothing more than an unauthorized trespasser squatting in my living room. My grandfather had taught me to build things that could survive a hurricane. I had built a legal fortress around my sanctuary, and my family had just shattered their teeth trying to bite into the walls. They thought they had buried me. It waited in the dark. At 7:30 on Thursday morning, the sunlight was just beginning to cut through the thin curtains of my hotel room. I had not slept. My mind was running through load paths and structural calculations, organizing the sequence of events that needed to happen next. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had known by heart since my university days. Phelan is a real estate attorney who works 3 time zones away. We met in an advanced contract law seminar that I took as an elective, and we spent countless nights studying in the library until 2 in the morning. He is sharp, completely devoid of sentimentality, and possesses the kind of legal mind that views human conflict as a simple equation of leverage and documentation. He answered on the second ring. He did not say hello. He just listened to the tone of my breathing and said, "Walk me through the fracture." I walked him through it. I told him about the Tuesday night arrival, the changed mailbox, Caleb standing in my kitchen holding my grandfather's cracked mug, Claire painting the nursery in morning light yellow. And finally, I told him about the forged quitclaim deed sitting in the county records with my counterfeit signature and a stolen notary seal. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear the faint sound of Phelan tapping a pen against his oak desk. "Do you have the trust documents secured?" he asked calmly. "In a safety deposit box," I replied. "The biometric clause is fully active." "Good," Phelan said, his voice dropping into a steady, authoritative rhythm. "Now, listen to me very carefully. Nora, you are going to feel the urge to call your mother and scream. You are going to want to text your brother the word fraud. You must not do any of those things. Right now, you are the only person who knows that you know. That asymmetric information is the most powerful weapon you will ever hold. Do not spend it on the cheap satisfaction of an argument." I looked out the hotel window at the morning traffic. I gave Caleb until Sunday to clear out. I told him, "He is hosting an engagement party. Claire's parents are coming to see the house. Caleb intends to show it off as his own." Phelan stopped tapping his pen. A slow, dark realization settled over the phone line. Sunday. Phelan repeated softly, appreciating the architecture of the situation. Then Sunday is not your deadline. Nora, Sunday is your stage. But you do not build a stage by warning the actors that the floor is about to collapse beneath them. You let them walk out to the center. You let them take the microphone. And then, you simply remove the supports. He gave me a strict sequence of instructions. It would take exactly 3 days to gather the necessary weight to bring the structure down. The first step had nothing to do with the police, and nothing to do with the courts. The first step was finding the woman whose name had been turned into a weapon. We built a quiet trap. I found Estelle through a simple online directory. She was a mobile notary public, 61 years old, with over 400 five-star reviews and a small, distinct logo of a hummingbird next to her contact information. I called her office and asked for a brief meeting, mentioning only that her seal had appeared on a document involving my property, and I needed to verify its authenticity. Notaries take their seals incredibly seriously. It is not just a stamp. It is their entire professional identity. It is a state-sanctioned guarantee of trust. We met at a quiet corner table inside a local diner. Estelle arrived before me. She was wearing a neat, pressed cardigan, her reading glasses hanging from a silver-beaded chain around her neck. She had the observant, weary eyes of a woman who had watched thousands of strangers sign thousands of life-altering contracts. Before her sat a thick, leather-bound chronological journal. I want to be precise about this moment. I did not approach her looking for a savior. I approached her looking for a data point. I slid the printed screenshot of the forged deed across the Formica table. Estelle put on her glasses and leaned forward. She looked at the date. She looked at the signature. Then, she looked at the bright red stamp bearing her name and commission number. I watched her face transform. She did not gasp. She did not make a scene. Instead, she went entirely still, the way the ocean surface flattens just before a massive shift in barometric pressure. The color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a cold, radiating fury. Someone had taken her 22 years of immaculate professional integrity and used it to commit a felony. I did not notarize this document, Estelle said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Are you sure? I asked gently. Estelle tapped a manicured fingernail directly onto the printed red seal. Look at the hummingbird. Nora, look exactly at where it sits. I leaned closer. On this stamp, Estelle explained, her tone sharp as shattered glass. The hummingbird is perfectly centered above my name, but that is not my stamp. When I ordered my custom seal 22 years ago, the manufacturer made a slight printing error. My hummingbird sits off-center, slightly to the left. I never corrected it because it became my signature marker. It is how I know a copy is truly mine. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mother had not just forged my cursive handwriting. She had found a picture of Estelle's seal online, sent it to a cheap custom stamp maker, and counterfeited a public officer's credential. She had committed a secondary, much more severe crime just to make her first crime look legitimate. Estelle slowly took off her glasses and folded them by the earpieces. It was the deliberate, focused movement of a woman preparing for war. She looked me directly in the eyes. Someone counterfeited my trust, she said evenly. You tell me when you need me. She reached for her bag. To solidify the case, we needed more than just a mismatched hummingbird. The law requires undeniable, documented proof of location and timeline. Estelle did not hesitate. She opened her heavy, leather-bound journal and smoothed the pages flat against the diner table. Every legitimate notary public is required by state law to maintain a sequential, chronological logbook of every single signature they witness. It is a meticulous record containing dates, times, document types, identification numbers, and often the physical thumbprints of the signers. It is a paper trail that cannot be argued with, manipulated, or erased. Estelle ran her finger down the column of dates until she reached the exact day my forged quitclaim deed had been stamped. "Here," she said, her voice ringing with grim satisfaction. I leaned over and read the entry. On the Tuesday in question, exactly 8 days ago, Estelle had been 50 miles away in a neighboring county. From 9 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, she had been sitting in the intensive care unit of a regional hospital. She had been tasked with notarizing a complex series of end-of-life directives and power of attorney documents for an elderly patient. "I have the patient's signature," Estelle pointed out systematically. "I have the thumbprints of his 2 daughters who acted as witnesses. I have the hospital visitor log that recorded my driver's license when I entered the building. Furthermore, the hospital lobby has security cameras that will show me walking through the front doors at the exact hour your mother claims I was standing in her kitchen stamping away your house." It was perfect. It was mathematically, structurally flawless. My mother had timed the forgery to coincide with my deployment on the offshore rig, knowing I would be unreachable. But in her arrogant rush to finalize the theft, she had blindly chosen a notary's name from a local directory without realizing that the woman she was framing was creating a bulletproof alibi 50 miles away in a room full of medical staff. I looked at Estelle. She was a 61-year-old woman in a modest cardigan. But in that moment, she was the most formidable force I had ever encountered. We were 2 completely different women, from different generations and different professions. Yet, we were bound together by the same fundamental principle. We both built our lives on accuracy, and we both violently resented being used as pawns in someone else's lie. "Caleb is hosting an engagement party this Sunday at 2 o'clock, I told her quietly. "My entire family will be there. My mother will be playing the role of the generous matriarch. I am going to let them finish their speeches before I dismantle the room." Estelle took out a pen. She turned to a blank page in her journal, the chronological record of her entire professional existence, and she wrote down my address and the time. "I will be there at 2:30, Estelle promised. We had our first weapon. By Friday morning, my legal arsenal was nearly complete. But as I sat in my hotel room drinking bitter coffee, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text message from Aunt Cora, my mother's older sister, who lived 2 states away and rarely reached out unless someone had died or gotten married. The message read, "Nora, sweetie, just checking in. Your mom said your transition to the new job in Colorado has been really hard on your mental health. I know you and Caleb have your differences, but it was so big of you to walk away and let him have the house for the baby. We are all praying for you to find peace. Colorado, mental health, walking away." I stared at the glowing screen as the sheer scale of my mother's architecture revealed itself. I had spent the last 48 hours focusing entirely on the physical paper, the forged deed, the counterfeit stamp, the biometric trust. But Bertram was far more insidious than a simple thief. She understood that stealing a house required more than just a fake document. It required a believable narrative to insulate the crime from the family's judgment. For the entire 4 weeks, I was submerged beneath the ocean, completely cut off from cellular service. Bertram had been running a highly calculated smear campaign. She had slowly and deliberately seeded the family group chats with fabricated updates. She told them the deep-sea work was causing me psychological distress. She planted the idea that I was abandoning my career to move to a landlocked state to escape my demons. She painted a portrait of a broken, unstable daughter who had generously, perhaps even desperately, surrendered her valuable coastal property to her grounded, stable younger brother because she could no longer handle the responsibility. It was a masterclass in manipulation. By the time I returned home, The entire extended family had already processed and accepted the lie. In their minds, no theft had occurred. A tragedy had been managed. Caleb was not a squatter. He was a dutiful brother stepping up to care for an empty house left behind by a sister who had lost her grip on reality. My mother had wrapped her felony in a blanket of maternal concern. She used my independence against me, knowing that because I never asked for help. My sudden collapse would seem shocking, but plausible to relatives who barely knew me. If I simply walked into that engagement party and yelled about a stolen house, I would perfectly fulfill the narrative she had written for me. I would look exactly like the crazy, bitter, unstable woman who was ruining a beautiful family moment. My mother had engineered the situation so that any emotional reaction from me would immediately discredit my truth. I did not reply to Aunt Cora. I deleted the message and set the phone face down on the desk. Bertram thought her stories could rewrite reality. But she forgot one crucial detail about the physical world. Paper never forgets a lie. I have always believed that every failing structure gives you warning signs before it collapses. If you are paying attention, you will hear the groans of the metal or see the hairline cracks in the concrete. The same principle applies to human beings. Before I completely detonated the foundation of my family, I wanted to give my father one final opportunity to prove he was not just a passive bystander to my mother's cruelty. I drove to my parents' house late Thursday afternoon. I found Silas exactly where I knew he would be standing in the dim light of his garage, meticulously organizing a drawer of loose screws. He had spent his entire marriage out here, sorting hardware while Bertram ran the household like a ruthless corporate dictator. "Dad," I said quietly, stepping onto the concrete floor. He did not look up. He kept his eyes focused on a handful of brass screws. "Your mother told me you stopped by the cottage," he said, his voice flat and weary. "She said you were being difficult about the arrangement." The arrangement. That was the sanitized word they had chosen for a felony. "Someone forged my signature on a quitclaim deed, Dad," I told him, keeping my tone perfectly level. "And someone counterfeited a public notary's seal to file it with the county. That is not an arrangement. That is a federal crime." Silas's hand paused over the drawer for a fraction of a second. Then, he dropped the screws into their plastic compartment with a soft clatter. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw the exact same mechanism of justification working in his eyes that I had seen in Bertram's. "We are your parents, Nora," he said heavily, as if he were explaining a simple math problem to a stubborn child. "We know what is fair, even when you cannot see it. That coastal house is far more than one single person needs. Caleb has a baby coming. He has a family to support. We decided what that property was meant for." He genuinely believed he was the reasonable one. In his mind, taking a $1.2 million asset from the daughter who worked a grueling offshore job to hand it to the son who refused to work was simply a matter of correcting an imbalance. "You recorded a document that says I sold it to him for $10, I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "You know I never signed that." "You always have to be right." Silas sighed, turning back to his workbench. "That is your problem. You would blow up this entire family over a piece of paper. Go back to your hotel. Nora, let your brother have this one thing." I looked at the man who had spent 32 years quietly endorsing my erasure just to keep his own peace. I had come to give him a door, a chance to step away from the blast zone. He had looked at the door and chosen to go back to his screws. "All right," I said softly. The last thread snapped. At 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I walked through the heavy double doors of the county courthouse, while Bertram was busy spinning elaborate tales on family group chats, crafting a tragic narrative about my supposed mental breakdown. I was standing under fluorescent lights doing the quiet, unglamorous work of gathering ammunition. A smear campaign is nothing but a story. Stories are fragile. They rely on emotion, manipulation, and the willingness of an audience to believe them. But stories crumble instantly the moment a certified document walks into the room. I waited in line and paid $11 for a certified copy of my original property deed. The clerk slid the heavy paper across the counter. It bore my name, my authentic signature from 4 years ago, the raised seal of the county, and the total, undeniable authority of the state. I placed it carefully into a thick manila folder. When I returned to my hotel room, I began laying out the documents on the bed. I did this with the exact same methodical precision I use when I arrange my inspection tools before diving 40 feet underwater. I needed to see the entire load path of the trap I was building. First, the certified original deed, my irrefutable proof of ownership. Second, the printed copy of the forged quitclaim deed, the evidence of the crime. Third, the photograph of Estelle's chronological journal, complete with the hospital's name, the date, and the thumbprints of her actual clients from 50 miles away. Fourth, the printed logs from my offshore contracting company, securely encrypted with satellite timestamps, proving my biometric presence on a deep-sea rig at the exact moment my mother claimed I was signing my house away on land. I stood at the foot of the bed and studied the arrangement. It was mathematically flawless. There was no angle of defense Bertram could take that would not immediately collapse under the weight of this paperwork. They had relied on my lifelong habit of retreating, assuming I would simply absorb the financial and emotional loss to avoid making a scene. They did not realize that I had spent the last 4 years calculating stress fractures in industrial steel. I was no longer the little girl who could be banished to the hallway without a fight. I was an engineer, and I was about to dismantle their lives with surgical precision. The anger I had felt on Tuesday night was completely gone now. It had been replaced by a cold, settling peace. There is a profound comfort in knowing exactly how a structure is going to fall, and knowing that you hold the only blueprint. I gathered the files and slid them into my leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. Everything was finally in place. The load was locked. On Saturday morning, my phone vibrated against the hotel nightstand. I picked it up and saw Caleb's name on the screen. It was a single text message, devoid of any punctuation, written with the careless authority of a man who believed the world had finally bowed to his desires. Engagement party tomorrow at 2. Wear something nice. Claire's parents are fancy. Don't embarrass us. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the glowing screen for a long time. The sheer audacity of the message was almost breathtaking. He was commanding me to attend a celebration in the home he had stolen from me. He was ordering me to dress appropriately, as if I were a distant, slightly embarrassing relative, rather than the rightful owner of the ground he was standing on. This is the psychological danger of the golden child syndrome. When a person is insulated from the consequences of their actions for their entire life, they lose the ability to recognize reality. Caleb had been handed everything he had ever ruined, replaced, or desired. Because Bertram had orchestrated the forgery. Caleb had fully convinced himself that the house was legally and morally his. He actually believed the delusion. He was not inviting me to make amends. He was inviting me to play a supporting role in his grand performance for Claire's wealthy parents. He needed the generous sister to stand by the fireplace, nod at the right times, and validate his fabricated success story. He needed me to physically bless the theft in front of an audience. I thought about Phelan's advice. Do not spend your leverage on a cheap argument. Let them build the stage. If I replied with anger, if I demanded my house back over a text message, Caleb would immediately alert Bertram. They would have 24 hours to scramble, to spin a new lie, to prepare Claire, and to manage the optics. The element of surprise was my most valuable asset, and I was not going to squander it for a moment of fleeting satisfaction. I opened the keyboard. I did not type out a paragraph explaining the federal wire fraud statutes. I did not mention Estelle's hummingbird stamp. I did not tell him that he was 24 hours away from losing his fiancée and his freedom. I typed a single word. Coming. I hit send. Then, I turned the phone face down on the desk, mimicking the exact way Caleb had turned my renovation photographs face down in that cardboard box. They wanted an audience. They wanted a performance to solidify their new, stolen reality. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. But I would be writing the final act. I set the phone down. Before heading back to the hotel on Tuesday night, I had swept the mail off the entryway table in my house and shoved it into my duffel bag. I had not looked at it since, on Saturday afternoon, needing something to occupy my mind. I unzipped the bag and pulled out the thick stack of envelopes. Most of it was standard junk mail, flyers for local landscaping companies, and utility bills still bearing my name. But near the bottom of the pile, there were 3 envelopes addressed to Caleb. They were not from standard credit card companies. They bore the stark, aggressive logos of high-risk, secondary financial lenders, the kind of lenders that operate on the absolute fringes of the law, charging astronomical interest rates to desperate people who have exhausted every legitimate line of credit. One of the envelopes was already torn open. I pulled out the paperwork. It was a pre-approval application for a home equity line of credit. The property address listed was my coastal cottage. The estimated available equity to be drawn was exactly $600,000. The air in the hotel room grew suddenly thin. I read the numbers again, feeling the familiar, icy chill of reading a compromised stress gauge. This was the missing variable. This was the hidden motive that escalated Bertram's actions from simple theft to desperate criminality. They had not forged a deed just to give Claire a cute nursery with yellow walls. They needed my name off that property because my house was entirely paid off. It was a massive, unencumbered asset sitting right in front of them. Caleb was drowning. His startup ventures had clearly collapsed into massive, dangerous debt. He owed money to people who did not send polite reminder emails. He needed a massive injection of cash immediately, and the only way to get it was to borrow against the equity of a $1.2 million house. If I had stayed on that oil rig for just one more week, Caleb would have signed that equity loan. He would have drained $600,000 out of the walls I had rebuilt with my own hands, and when he inevitably defaulted on the payments, the bank or worse, the predatory lenders would have foreclosed on my home. Claire had absolutely no idea. She thought she was marrying a successful entrepreneur who had just been gifted a beautiful home. She did not know she was tethering herself to a man who was moments away from financial ruin and federal fraud charges. My mother had rushed the forgery because the wolves were already at the door. They needed my equity. With the full scope of the financial threat laid bare, I knew I could not wait for the party to quietly evict Caleb. I needed law enforcement present to secure the property and officially document the trespass before Caleb could attempt to sign any loan documents. I picked up my phone and called the county sheriff's civil division. I requested a standard civil standby for Sunday afternoon. I explained calmly that I was the verified owner of a property. I had an unauthorized occupant refusing to leave, and I needed a deputy present to ensure a peaceful removal. The dispatcher put me on a brief hold. When he returned, his tone had shifted from helpful to strictly bureaucratic. "Ma'am, I am looking at the county records right now," the dispatcher said slowly. "I cannot authorize a civil standby for an eviction. There was a legal motion filed electronically yesterday afternoon on this property." My brow furrowed. "What kind of motion?" A quiet title lawsuit, he replied. Filed by an attorney representing a Bertram and Caleb, they are officially contesting your ownership and claiming a dispute over the validity of the original deed transfers. Because there is now active civil litigation over who legally owns the property. Our deputies cannot intervene. We cannot remove an occupant during an active title dispute. That is a courthouse matter now. A judge will have to sort it out. I closed my eyes and let out a slow, controlled breath. Bertram had hired a lawyer, probably using whatever little cash she had left, or promising to pay him once Caleb secured the equity loan. She had anticipated that I might try to call the police to prevent a swift eviction. Her lawyer had quickly filed a frivolous civil suit, effectively throwing sand into the gears of the legal system. It was a brilliant, incredibly toxic stalling tactic. The police despise getting involved in messy family real estate arguments. By filing the quiet title action, Bertram had successfully downgraded her felony forgery into what looked like a routine, albeit ugly, domestic civil dispute. She knew the civil court system was slow. She knew it could take months to get a hearing. Months for Caleb to marry Claire. Months for the baby to be born. Months to finalize the $600,000 equity loan and drain my house dry. By the time a judge finally looked at the paperwork, the money would be gone, and I would be the villain trying to evict a newborn baby from its home. Thank you for the information, I told the dispatcher evenly, and hung up. I did not panic. A civil dispute protects you from the civil division of the sheriff's office, but a civil dispute does not protect you from the federal government. They bought themselves time. When the sheriff's dispatcher told me about the quiet title lawsuit, I did not throw my phone across the hotel room. I did not break down in tears over the unfairness of the justice system. I simply sat at the small desk, opened my leather briefcase, and pulled out the thick, bound portfolio I had retrieved from my bank's secure vault earlier that week. If you are dealing with a family member who uses the legal system as a weapon, you have to understand the difference between a civil dispute and federal fraud. A civil dispute is an argument between two parties over who has the rightful claim to an asset. The courts treat it like a messy divorce. They freeze everything, tell both sides to stand in their corners, and slowly evaluate the evidence over several months. Bertram was counting on that exact sluggish bureaucracy to give Caleb time to secure a $600,000 home equity loan. But my mother had fundamentally misunderstood what she was attacking. She thought my house was just a standard piece of real estate, governed by a standard deed. She did not know about the irrevocable trust my grandfather and I had established. I opened the portfolio to page 14. The legal language was incredibly specific and absolutely unyielding. It clearly stated that the property could never be sold, transferred, or leveraged by a simple signature on a printed form. Any transfer of ownership required a verified biometric scan, my physical thumbprint executed in the presence of the designated trust attorney at a specific bank branch. Without that biometric verification, any piece of paper claiming to transfer the title was legally meaningless. Bertram had not just forged a document. She had forged a document that was physically incapable of executing the action it described. From the absolute second she pressed that counterfeit notary seal onto the paper, the deed was completely dead. It had zero legal standing. My mother's high-priced, sleazy lawyer had filed a quiet title lawsuit based on a counterfeit document that violated a registered biometric trust. That meant they were no longer just arguing over a house. They were using the United States postal and electronic systems to commit massive financial fraud. If you love watching undeniable paper trails destroy arrogant lies, take a second to hit subscribe, because the architecture of this trap was finally complete. I traced my finger over my grandfather's name on the trust document. He had promised me that a strong foundation could weather any storm. He was entirely right. Bertram thought she was playing a clever game of family chess, moving pawns around to steal my sanctuary. She did not realize she had just walked into a federal vault and locked the door behind herself. The fake deed was dead. At 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, the sky over the coast was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I sat in my truck in the hotel parking lot with the engine running, holding my phone to my ear. I was not calling the civil division of the sheriff's department this time. I was bypassing the local squabbles entirely. I dialed the direct line for the financial crimes unit and asked for Detective Bishop. When he answered, his voice had the flat, weary patience of a man who had spent 20 years watching people destroy their lives for money. I did not give him a tearful story about my cruel mother and my spoiled brother. I gave him the precise anatomy of a felony. Detective Bishop, my name is Nora. I began evenly. I am reporting the use of a counterfeit public notary seal attached to a forged quitclaim deed, which is currently being used to fraudulently secure a $600,000 home equity line of credit. The line went completely silent for 3 seconds. The weariness vanished from his voice, replaced by razor-sharp professional interest. Walk me through the evidence, ma'am. I walked him through it. I told him about the off-center hummingbird logo. I told him about Estelle's chronological journal, placing her 50 miles away in a hospital room at the exact hour the forgery occurred. And finally, I explained the existence of the biometric irrevocable trust, which proved the transfer was not just illegal, but structurally impossible without my physical presence. Your local civil division refused a standby request because the suspects filed a quiet title suit yesterday. I explained, they are attempting to mask a federal wire fraud attempt as a family property dispute to buy time for the loan to clear. I could hear Detective Bishop typing rapidly on his keyboard. He pulled up the county records. He saw the forged deed. He saw the counterfeit stamp. This is no longer a civil matter. Nora, Bishop said, his tone turning remarkably cold. Counterfeiting a state notary seal to push through a fraudulent loan of that size is a major felony. It is a state offense, and it crosses into federal territory. They are hosting an engagement party at the property today at 2 o'clock. I informed him. The notary whose seal was stolen has agreed to be there at 2:30 to formally identify the counterfeit stamp in front of witnesses. Bishop let out a low whistle. You built a very tight box. Nora, do not confront them alone. I am swearing out an emergency warrant based on the counterfeit seal. I will have a unit there. I thanked him and ended the call. I looked at the time on my dashboard. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning. I had 5 hours left to prepare. The trap was finally set. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from my own house at exactly 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. I did not want them to see my vehicle in the driveway. I wanted to walk in exactly as they expected me to, quietly, obediently, like a defeated guest. I wore a tailored navy blazer and clean, pressed trousers. I dressed exactly the way my brother had commanded me to in his arrogant text message. There is a very specific, undeniable power in arriving exactly as instructed, only to ruin absolutely everything but the lie. Stepping onto the gravel path I had laid myself, the coastal air felt heavy with the smell of expensive catering and salt water. They had strung cheap, plastic cafe lights across my beautiful cedar deck. Through the large bay windows, the gathering was visible. Exactly 22 people mingled inside. Claire's parents stood near the restored brick fireplace, holding crystal wine glasses and nodding politely. My aunts and uncles, the same relatives who had received Bertram's fabricated text messages about my supposed mental breakdown, populated the edges of the room, and in the center of it all, holding court like a conquering queen, was my mother. Bertram was wearing a pearl necklace and a smile so wide it looked painful. She was gesturing to the exposed wooden beams I had spent weeks sanding by hand, proudly claiming ownership of the space. Caleb stood beside her, his arm wrapped tightly around Claire, playing the role of the successful, grounded family man. I took a deep breath, letting the cool ocean air fill my lungs. I did not feel angry. I felt the profound, chilling calm of an inspector who already knows the bridge is going to collapse. If you are ready for the truth to finally drop, let me know in the comments. I opened the heavy oak door of my own house and stepped inside. The lively chatter in the room instantly died. 22 heads turned to look at me. The air grew thick and heavy. Bertram saw me, and her eyes flashed with a brief moment of panic before the polished, theatrical warmth flooded back into her face. She thought I was there to surrender. She thought I had come to quietly bless the theft in front of an audience. "Nora," Bertram announced, her voice ringing out like a silver bell. She crossed the room and firmly grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging slightly into my sleeve. She turned to the wealthy in-laws. "Everyone, this is my brilliant, independent daughter, the one I told you about, the one who has been so incredibly generous to her brother." I looked at Caleb. He raised his glass to me, his eyes full of triumphant, arrogant relief. I stepped onto the stage. Bertram did not let go of my arm. She steered me toward the center of the living room, forcing me to stand next to Caleb and Claire. The 22 guests watched us with polite, expectant smiles. Claire's mother beamed at me, a look of profound admiration on her face for the woman she believed had just gifted her daughter a $1 million coastal estate. "Since we are all here," Bertram said, raising her wine glass to quiet the room, "I want to say a few words about family." The room hushed completely. She was actually going to give a speech. "When you raise children, you learn that they need different things," Bertram began, her voice dripping with artificial maternal warmth. "Some children need guidance, and some children, like our Nora, are just so fiercely independent that they never need anything at all. The hardest part of being a mother is knowing how to balance those scales." She looked at Caleb, her eyes shining with fake tears. "So, when Caleb and Claire told us about the baby, we made a family decision. We decided to give this young, beautiful family a home, because that is what a family does. You give from your strength to support those in need." Bertram turned to me, offering a fond, devastating smile. And Nora, with her big career and her busy life traveling the world, she understood perfectly. "Didn't you, sweetheart?" 22 faces waited for me to nod. They waited for me to validate the delusion, to accept the role of the strong, silent ATM machine that I had played my entire life. I looked at my mother. I did not blink. I refused to elevate my volume. "You cannot give away what is not yours." "Mom," I said. My voice was incredibly quiet, but in that silent room, it cut through the air like a surgical scalpel. A man in the corner stopped with his drink halfway to his mouth. Bertram's smile remained frozen, but the muscles in her jaw began to twitch. "Nora," Bertram hissed, her tone dropping its warmth instantly. "This is not the time." "You picked the time," I replied evenly. "You picked the audience." Caleb stepped forward, his face flushing a dark, angry red. His composure shattered immediately. He reached out and pulled Claire close to his chest, attempting to use his pregnant fiancée as a physical and emotional shield. "Do not do this, Nora," Caleb demanded, his voice shaking. "Do not ruin this in front of my wife." I looked at Claire. Her hand was resting on her belly, her eyes wide and confused. I felt a deep wave of sorrow for her, but I knew the kindest thing I could do was give her the truth before she married into a nightmare. "Did he tell you he bought this house, Claire?" I asked her gently. "Or did he conveniently hide the fact that he is currently applying for a $600,000 home equity loan against my walls to pay off his loan shark creditors?" The silence was absolutely deafening. Claire visibly recoiled. She stepped away from Caleb, her hand slipping from his grasp. She looked at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. What is she talking about? Caleb. What creditors? She is lying, Caleb shouted, the volume of his voice spiking out of control. She has always been jealous. Mom warned everyone she would have a mental breakdown and try to ruin this. She is crazy. He was frantic, desperately throwing Bertram's fabricated narrative at the wall, hoping it would stick. Claire's father, a tall, imposing man who had built his own logistics company from the ground up, stepped forward. He did not look at Caleb. He looked directly at me, his eyes narrowing with sharp, analytical caution. Before anyone could speak another word, the heavy brass knocker on my front door sounded twice. It was exactly 2:31 in the afternoon. I walked past my frozen brother and opened the door. Estelle stood on the porch. She was wearing her neat cardigan, her reading glasses hanging from the silver-beaded chain. She held her thick, leather-bound notary journal pressed against her chest like a shield. She stepped into the living room, her eyes sweeping over the 22 silent, stunned guests. "I apologize for the interruption," Estelle said, her voice clear, authoritative, and completely devoid of fear. "My name is Estelle. I am a commissioned notary public for the state." Bertram's face drained of all color. It was the exact shade of wet ash. She took a step backward, bumping into the brick fireplace. Estelle opened her journal and turned it outward so the entire room could see the pages. 8 days ago, a quitclaim deed was filed transferring this property from Nora to Caleb. That document bears my official seal. Estelle paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the wealthy in-laws and the confused relatives. "I have never met Nora before this week," Estelle stated firmly. "I did not witness her signature. On the day that document was supposedly signed in this town, I was 50 miles away in a hospital intensive care unit, and my journal contains the thumbprints of the patients I was attending to prove it." "That is absurd!" Bertram snapped, her voice shrill and desperate. "The document is recorded. It has your stamp on it." Estelle looked at my mother with a level of disgust I had never seen before. "It has a counterfeit copy of my stamp," she corrected sharply. "My hummingbird logo sits to the left. The one on your forged document is perfectly centered. You did not just steal your daughter's house. You forged my identity." Claire's father stepped forward. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his own reading glasses, and looked at Estelle. "May I see the journal?" "Ma'am?" Estelle handed it to him. He was a man who read contracts for a living. He studied the dates, the signatures, and the meticulous chronological entries. Then, he looked up at Caleb. The illusion was completely shattered. Just as Mr. Kingsley handed the notary journal back to Estelle, a heavy silence fell over the cedar deck. The wealthy in-laws, the distant aunts, and the polished guests were completely frozen, staring at the shattered illusion of a happy family. Before Caleb could formulate another frantic lie, a man in a crisp gray suit walked through the open sliding glass doors. He bypassed the confused guests and stepped directly into the center of the room. It was Detective Bishop. He held a thick manila folder under his left arm, his expression radiating the absolute, unyielding authority of the state. "Bertram," Detective Bishop said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the low hum of the plastic cafe lights. "I am with the Financial Crimes Unit. We need to have a conversation about a counterfeit state seal and an attempted $600,000 fraudulent loan application." Bertram backed away until her shoulders hit the brick mantel. For 32 years, she had controlled every narrative in our family. She had operated with the supreme confidence of a woman who believed the rules did not apply to her, so long as she could manipulate the people involved. But she could not manipulate the detective standing in my living room. Her polished mask finally cracked. She did not apologize. She did not express a single ounce of remorse for forging my signature or trying to steal my home. Instead, she did what toxic people always do when they are cornered by the truth. She weaponized her victimhood. She stopped defending the forgery and started screaming her justifications to the entire room. "Look at her," Bertram shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. The elegant, maternal warmth was entirely gone, replaced by a bitter, venomous rage. "She has her engineering degree. She makes a massive salary. She travels the world. She never needed this house. Caleb has a baby coming, and he has absolutely nothing to his name." The guests stared at her in horrified fascination. Bertram's chest heaved. "I am his mother. I was correcting a massive injustice I took from a daughter who has too much to provide for a son who is drowning. She would never even notice the equity was gone. She is completely selfish for doing this to her own brother." There it was. The ugly, unfiltered truth that had run silently beneath my entire life. She was confessing to a federal felony in front of 22 people and a police detective. And she genuinely believed she was the righteous victim. She believed my hard work was nothing more than an ATM designed to fund Caleb's failures. I refused to elevate my volume. I offered her 0 tears. I looked at the woman who had brought me into this world, and I felt nothing but a profound, chilling pity. "You forged my name," I said, my voice perfectly steady, "because you decided I was strong enough to absorb the theft." Bertram glared at me, her eyes full of unrepentant fury. She truly believed I owed her my foundation. She did not realize she had just confessed to everything. The silence was absolute. The weight of Bertram's confession hung over the room like a heavy winter fog. But the most devastating casualty of the afternoon was not my mother's reputation. It was the young, pregnant woman standing near the bay window, clutching her stomach as her entire future disintegrated before her eyes. Claire let her hands drop from her belly. The color had completely vanished from her face. She looked at Caleb, who was practically shrinking into the floorboards, desperately trying to avoid her gaze. "You told me she moved to Colorado," Claire whispered, her voice trembling so violently it was hard to hear. "You sat in my parents' kitchen, holding my hand, and you promised them you were a successful businessman. You told me your sister was so proud of you that she gifted us this beautiful house for the baby." Caleb opened his mouth, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of defense. "Claire, please, I can explain everything. Mom said—" "Do not blame your mother." Claire cut him off, a sudden, fierce strength emerging through her tears. She took a step toward me, but she kept her eyes locked on Caleb. "That room I am painting, the one with the best light, the one you told me to paint morning light yellow for the nursery." She swallowed hard, a tear finally spilling over her eyelashes. "Whose room was it, Caleb?" Caleb looked at the floor. He could not answer her. I stepped forward and answered her gently, because she was the only person in that house who truly deserved gentleness. "It was my room, Claire. I slept in there on an air mattress for 2 years while I rebuilt the foundation of this house. It has the best light in the mornings." Claire closed her eyes. A soft, agonizing sob escaped her throat. She realized in that exact moment that the beautiful life she was building was constructed entirely on stolen ground. Caleb had used her innocence and her unborn child to justify a $600,000 federal fraud scheme. She did not run to him. She did not yell. She simply turned her back on the man she was supposed to marry. "Mr. Kingsley stepped forward. The polite, wealthy businessman who had arrived with a bottle of expensive champagne now looked at my brother with absolute, chilling disgust. He wrapped a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders and steered her toward the front door. "We are leaving," Mr. Kingsley announced to the room. "Claire, Wait! Caleb shouted, taking a desperate step forward. Mr. Kingsley stopped and shot Caleb a look that could have frozen the ocean. Caleb froze in his tracks. Then, the Kingsleys walked out of my house, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind them. Caleb rounded on me, his face contorted with pure hatred. You ruined my entire life, he screamed, abandoning all pretense. You always had to be the winner. I looked at him calmly. I did not ruin your life, Caleb. I just stopped funding it. He had nothing left. Just as Detective Bishop stepped forward to formally address Bertram, a man in a cheap, ill-fitting suit pushed his way through the remaining guests. He was sweating slightly, clutching a leather briefcase. This was the sleazy attorney Bertram had hired with borrowed money to file the quiet title lawsuit, the one who had temporarily stalled the sheriff's deputies. He moved to position himself between Bertram and the detective, raising his hands in a placating gesture. Detective, hold on a moment, the lawyer said smoothly, projecting his voice for the audience. My client is under severe emotional distress. I have filed a civil motion challenging the ownership of this property. Furthermore, I have a medical affidavit right here. He pulled a crisp white paper from his briefcase and waved it like a magic wand. This affidavit, he declared, suggests that Nora suffers from nitrogen narcosis and severe cognitive dissonance due to her prolonged exposure to deep-sea pressure. It is highly probable that she voluntarily signed the quitclaim deed before her departure, authorized the notary, and simply suffered a memory lapse. Therefore, the signature is arguably authentic, and this remains a strictly civil dispute over mental competency. It was a brilliant, incredibly toxic legal maneuver, the false counterattack. He was trying to cast enough medical doubt on my memory to derail the felony forgery charge and drag the case into a years-long civil battle. Bertram stood taller, a spark of malicious hope returning to her eyes. She thought she had found a loophole. I did not panic. I did not argue with the lawyer. I simply smiled a calm, dignified smile that made the attorney pause. I walked over to the kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and turned the screen around to face him. I pulled up the encrypted, satellite-logged biometric data from my offshore contracting firm. This fake deed, I said, pointing to the printed copy on the table, is time-stamped at 2:15 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I want you to look at this screen. Counselor. The lawyer leaned in, his eyes scanning the data. At that exact minute, I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. My biometric thumbprint was actively logged into a pressurized submersible control panel 300 miles offshore, 40 meters below sea level. The data is secured by a federal maritime satellite. I closed the laptop with a sharp snap. If you submit a knowingly false medical affidavit to aid in a $600,000 wire fraud scheme, you will not just lose your license. I told him quietly, you will share a federal cell with my mother. The lawyer stared at me, the color completely draining from his face. He looked at the satellite logs, then looked at Bertram. He realized instantly that he had been dragged into a felony. He dropped the medical affidavit on the table, took 2 steps away from Bertram, and looked directly at Detective Bishop. I formally withdraw my representation of this client, he announced quickly. He turned and practically ran out the front door. The trap snapped shut. With the sleazy lawyer fleeing down the driveway, the final desperate illusion of safety vanished. The room was deathly quiet, save for the sound of the ocean wind rattling the window panes. Detective Bishop did not waste another moment. He opened his manila folder and looked directly at Bertram. Bertram, based on the evidence of a counterfeit state notary seal and an attempted fraudulent real estate transaction, you are officially under investigation for federal wire fraud. I am going to need you to come down to the precinct right now. Bertram did not scream this time. The reality of the situation had finally pierced through her lifelong entitlement. Her hands began to tremble as Bishop read her rights. She looked around the room at her sisters, her cousins, the people she had spent weeks lying to. Nobody made eye contact with her. Nobody stepped forward to defend her. She had built her entire social standing on the appearance of perfection. And now she was being escorted out of a stolen house by a financial crimes detective. Silas sat heavily on my leather sofa, staring blankly at his shoes. Bishop paused in front of him. "Silas," Bishop said sternly, "your signature is on the second recorded instrument as a witness." My father, the man who had spent his entire life avoiding conflict by hiding in the garage, looked up with hollow eyes. He did not try to invent a clever defense. He did not try to protect his wife. He simply surrendered to the weight of his own cowardice. "She just told me to sign it," Silas whispered, his voice cracking. "I never read it. I just did what she asked, so she would stop yelling." It was the most pathetic, tragic confession I had ever heard. He had sold out his daughter's future simply to avoid an uncomfortable conversation at the dinner table. Bishop took notes, informing Silas that he would be required to give a formal sworn statement. Across the room, Caleb was practically vibrating with panic. He knew that without the equity loan, the high-risk creditors were going to find him. He had lost Claire. He had lost his financial lifeline, and his mother was facing federal charges. Caleb did not say a single word to me. He did not apologize for breaking into my home, for using my grandfather's mug, or for treating me like a guest in my own sanctuary. He grabbed 2 cardboard boxes full of his expensive sneakers and bolted out the back door, desperate to outrun the consequences of his own arrogance. The remaining guests filtered out in complete, embarrassed silence. Aunt Cora, the one who had sent the condescending text message, could not even look at me as she hurried down the front steps. Within 20 minutes, the property was completely clear. The house emptied out. The cafe lights strung across the cedar deck buzzed with a cheap, hollow sound. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the coastal grass. For the first time in 4 weeks, I was standing completely alone inside the walls of my own house, navigating the chaotic wreckage of the afternoon. Caleb's abandoned folding table sat awkwardly in the center of the floor. Half-empty champagne glasses rested on my granite countertops. The house smelled faintly of expensive perfume and profound regret. There was no sudden rush of euphoria. Defeating your own family is not a victory parade. It is an autopsy. You are forced to examine the absolute failure of the people who were supposed to love you, and you must accept that the disease was terminal. I felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest, but it was not grief. It was the quiet, settling peace of an amputee who has finally removed a toxic limb. Moving toward the corner where Caleb had shoved my belongings, I reached into the cardboard box and pulled out the 16 framed photographs of my renovation process. One by one, I turned them right side up. I looked at the picture of the rotting floorboards I had torn out. I looked at the image of the massive structural support beam I had installed with my own hands. I carried the frames back to the hallway and began hanging them back on the wall, driving the nails exactly into the holes they had previously occupied. With every frame I hung, a fraction of the heavy, invisible weight I had carried since childhood began to lift. Bertram had spent 32 years telling me that my strength meant I did not require love, respect, or boundaries. She had convinced me that my purpose was to quietly absorb the impact of everyone else's failures. As I straightened the final photograph, I realized the truth. My strength was not a utility for them to exploit. My strength was the exact reason I had survived them. I walked to the front door holding a heavy brass deadbolt I had purchased at the hardware store 3 days ago. I unscrewed the lock Caleb had compromised and installed the new, reinforced mechanism. The metal components slid into place with a satisfying, heavy click. I locked the door, securing the perimeter of my sanctuary. I stood in the quiet foyer, listening to the distant rhythm of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. I had lost the parents who never truly saw me, and the brother who only ever used me, but as I looked around the house that I had saved, I knew the trade was worth it. I was finally safe. 2 months have passed since the afternoon my mother walked out of my house, accompanied by a financial crimes detective. The legal dust has finally settled. Phelan, my attorney, filed a successful motion to quiet the title, permanently striking the forged documents from the county records. The predatory lenders abandoned their fraudulent $600,000 home equity application the moment Detective Bishop contacted their corporate compliance department. On paper, and in reality, my coastal sanctuary is entirely mine. But surviving a structural collapse changes the way you look at a building. There is an old, detached carriage house sitting at the far back of my property. It had been used for dusty storage for decades. Over the past 6 weeks, I have quietly spent a portion of my offshore engineering salary to completely retrofit it. I installed new drywall, upgraded the plumbing, and secured the exterior doors with industrial-grade electronic locks. I did not build it for myself. I partnered with a local nonprofit organization to offer the carriage house as a temporary, anonymous safe haven for women escaping financial abuse. Bertram always told the family that my independence was a character flaw. She claimed I was an unfeeling machine, incapable of caring for anyone. The carriage house is my silent rebuttal to her entire worldview. Strength is not a flaw, and it is not a free resource for manipulative people to mine. When you are no longer forced to act as a shock absorber for toxic family members, you realize exactly how much energy you actually have to give to the world. Speaking of those who need it, Claire formally canceled the wedding the morning after the engagement party. She moved back into her parents' secure, quiet home. 3 weeks ago, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. I do not call her, and I do not insert myself into her new life. That would be an unfair intrusion. However, I did contact a separate wealth management firm. Every single month, an anonymous cashier's check is deposited into a secure educational trust account set up for her daughter. It is not an apology, because I have nothing to apologize for. It is simply a redistribution of resources, executed entirely on my own terms. Last weekend, I walked up the stairs to the bedroom at the end of the hall, the room with the best morning light. The painting supplies Claire had left behind were still sitting neatly in the corner. I picked up the roller, poured the paint into the plastic tray, and finished the job she had started. I painted all 4 walls a soft, brilliant yellow. It is no longer a nursery built on a foundation of lies. It is my new home office. I arranged my heavy drafting table directly by the window. I can look out over the ocean while I calculate stress loads and review blueprints. The exact space that was meant to solidify my erasure has become the very place where I design my future. The room glows with warmth. It is 6 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. The coastal fog is just beginning to lift off the dark water, retreating back into the vastness of the ocean. I am sitting alone on my rebuilt cedar deck, the cool, salty air wrapping around my shoulders. I am holding my grandfather's cracked ceramic mug in both hands. The coffee inside is black and bitter, exactly the way he used to drink it. The legal machinery has moved exactly as Detective Bishop promised it would. Bertram eventually accepted a federal plea agreement to avoid a lengthy, humiliating public trial. She is currently serving a multi-year sentence in a minimum security facility for wire fraud and counterfeiting a public seal. Silas was forced to declare bankruptcy, completely unable to manage the aggressive legal fees and the massive debts Caleb left behind. As for my brother, Caleb vanished the night the trap snapped shut. He is likely drifting between cheap, cash-only motels, constantly looking over his shoulder for the private, high-risk creditors he still deeply owes. Without my equity to act as a financial shield, the reality of his arrogant lifestyle finally caught up to him. The house breathes differently now. For weeks after they left, I would catch myself listening for the sound of Caleb's heavy footsteps, or anticipating the shrill ring of Bertram's demanding phone calls. But those sounds never came. The silence, which used to feel heavy and isolating, has transformed into something entirely different. It feels like absolute freedom. My mother shouted that I was punishing them. She accused me of having a heart of stone. But I have spent the last 2 months reflecting on the architecture of our family, and I have realized something profound. Setting a strict, unyielding boundary does not mean you are a cold person. Refusing to let someone steal from you does not make you cruel. It simply means you have finally stopped paying for a warmth that was never going to arrive. I spent 32 years waiting for a seat at their table, only to discover they were secretly planning to chop up my chair for firewood. My grandfather used to sit on this exact porch and watch the tide come in. He taught me that a legacy is not just a physical piece of property you passively inherit. A legacy is the ground you are strong enough to protect. I protected my ground. I secured my foundation. And I removed the rot before it could bring the entire house down. I take a slow sip from the cracked mug. The sun breaks through the fog, casting a brilliant line of gold across the waves. I am 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not bracing for an impact. If you have ever had to cut toxic ties to save your own life, or if you know the quiet, profound peace of finally choosing yourself, share your story below. You are not alone in this fight. We read every single one. The structure stands perfectly strong.